Hey, good morning, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club. As you saw there, we actually had the wrong credits up at the front of the show. Oops. It's fine, though. I want to welcome you to the last show of January. This is actually also our last fully live stream show. After this, we will be going to edited shows instead. So enjoy the last show where literally anything could happen. Probably not, though. Probably nothing weird will happen. Anyway, yeah, I'm Brian Hibbs, and welcome to the Adult Graphic Novel Club. Our selection this month is a really fun sports kind of a post-apocalyptic kind of comic. The book is I Heart Skull Crusher, and I'm really happy here to have Josie Campbell. Hello, Josie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. We're doing great. Yeah. Yeah. So, my first question's always the same here because I kind of think it gets to the core of what the show is about, and it's why comics. Of all the ways that you can do art, comics strike me quite often, and this is a guy who owns a comic book shop and interviews people all the time, but comics strike me as, is a really complicated way to create art, and one that doesn't necessarily pay very well. Right?
Yeah, no, it's you're doing it for the love. I mean, it's especially complicated if you're a writer and not an artist. And I'm like, I want to write in comics. Like, I want to poke an artist and tell him or her what to draw. Like, it's an even more like obtuse step away.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is it about comics that thrills you, that excites you, that pushes that little button in your heart that makes you go, oh yeah, I'm going to sit here and work really hard for not a lot of remuneration and tell these kinds of stories?
I mean, I think it's a combination of like, comics are one of the first things that I read as a kid. Like and I'll date myself. I'm still old enough that comics would be in your like local pharmacy, like your local CVS. And I would go with my mom as she would go pick up things when I was like a really little kid, and I'd see the comics on the shelves, and I would kind of secretly flip through them while she was looking through, like, trying to probably buy the things that kept me alive. And I would just be enthralled because I still love the way comics work. I love their pacing. I love the way they tell a story. I love how much you're reading the artwork and not just the words. Like I work in TV as well and film. Like I love sort of media of all sorts. But for me, comics really gets to this really essential way to tell a story that here is a couple of pictures. Here is not that many words, unless you're like Chris Claremont or somebody like that. But like a short amount of time, you've told a story as complete as like a movie, as like a TV show, as a story being told to you. And the comics I was looking at, they were gorgeous. Like I couldn't tear my eyes away. Even the most like 90s comics where everybody's feet were like very tiny and like their like hips were very wide and there's pouches everywhere. That style interested me because it was something I didn't get anywhere else. I didn't see anywhere else. So it was this sort of perfect encapsulation of how to tell a story that like really enthralled me. And then like seeing how a story unfolds in just a couple of like brush strokes, like it got me, and it still gets me to this day. Like I'm still so in awe, especially if people, like, I'm a little wordy myself, especially people who are able to do like so much with like just a panel or just a splash page. It's one of the most pure forms of storytelling, I'd say.
Yeah, no, I agree with that very much. What I mean, you sort of hinted at it, but like, what's the kind of the first comics that you remember reading, and not necessarily like the littlest tiny kid memory, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what's the first one that kind of stuck with you that
Mm.
was like, okay, this is really cool?
So I basically had three that like kind of hit, two a little earlier and one a little later, but like the three that like really hooked me in. So like the first one was Wonder Woman, actually, and that is my like youngest little kid memory. I It was going to CVS. Ironically, for my entire career, my parents like weren't they didn't really like comics. Like they were not thrilled that I wanted to read comics. And it was like a very like limited amount of stuff that I could read. Like they were very strict about like what things I could consume. So for the most part, comics were actually kind of not allowed in the house, but they made an exception for Wonder Woman because like they're like, well, that's from my childhood. I remember her. Um,
Right.
so I remember one of the first comics I ever got was this Wonder Woman comic that was also like very 90s. It was like Cersei was like a crime boss with like Ares was like a kingpin and like there's like a whole storyline about bulimia. Like it was very like somebody was doing cocaine. Like I don't think if my parents had read these comics, they would have let like an 8-year-old buy them. But
Sure.
I loved it because I loved the artwork. It was like coming off of the end of like sort of the Perez stuff. Like I loved the way it looked. And I just remembered like I still remember the main villain of that one arc that I had was like an assassin who had hemophilia, so she could never get hit. And I was just like in my kid brain, I was like, that's the coolest thing. She just
Yeah.
had to be the best. I also around the same time fell in love with Sensational She-Hulk, which was so funny because it's like superheroes, but like much more of like a sitcom comedy kind of thing that was going on. Because again, that CVS had back issues of like Sensational She-Hulk for some reason in that one graphic novel. And so like I convinced my parents again to get that for me because one of the issues had Howard the Duck on it. And I was like, well, that's Donald Duck. So it's a Disney comic, so it's totally fine. And they're like, oh, okay. So those were the two comics I was allowed to buy as a kid because they knew about one and the other one I was just prophetic. I guess I knew that one day Disney would buy Marvel. Uh,
Right.
and then the third comic that really cemented though my love for all of this was Sailor Moon. And that came out in sort of like middle school for me. And I had a friend whose parents had like basically like we're connected through like sort of like the convention route to like the Singapore like dubs and the like sort of like kids don't know how good they have it now with anime where they're like I just turn it on TV. It's like we had to go to a back alley where a weird guy would be like, all right, I've got this stuff from Hong Kong, and that's how you got your card captor. But like so she had a bunch of Sailor Moon, and I went over to her house and read it, and we just fell in love because it was just like it was gorgeous. The artwork was great. It was these cool girls going out and basically fighting crime, but in like this very feminine, very like ethereal way. Like I was so sucked in with all of the like, the moon symbols and like the various like power cries and moon makeup, like all of that stuff really spoke to me. And so that was also like kind of middle school was around the time that I was like maybe gonna stop reading comics so much. Like it felt like there was less and less for me. And then here's Sailor Moon, and I loved it. I got sucked into manga, and that kind of kept me reading and kept me reading through up until like college when I started getting right back into like sort of American comics and like realizing how much cool stuff was going on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's neat. I often think that that I don't want to say kids today, but
Hmm.
people who are younger than us
Yeah.
um don't realize how good they have it in terms of access,
Yes.
I mean, I grew up at a time where, if you wanted to watch a television show, you had to watch it at the time
Yeah.
that it was on, and that was your only chance to watch it. I mean,
Yeah.
for me at least, that was pre-DVR, DVDs and not even
The
VCR.
yeah,
Yeah,
VHS and yeah. No,
yeah,
you had to memorize the schedule
right,
and like God help you if like a family member was visiting and you're like, no, you don't understand. Star Trek is on right now. And they'd
exactly.
be like, you have to talk to your grand aunt
Yeah,
instead.
yeah,
So yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. But now everything just comes to you, and you can get whatever you want. And honestly, I think it makes weaker fans. I really do.
I
Right?
mean, I think it's like a double-edged sword because I think what's great is that you reach a larger group of people. Like
Sure, of course.
you do meet more people that you maybe wouldn't have met before. I do think it's like there is this sort of weird divide between like people who sort of grew up in the sort of comics age where it's like you really were into it because you had to go out and get it and people who, it's like, oh, I can flip through. I can, like, oh, I'm not like it's like a different level of fandom of like, I like comics, but like I'm not going to read every issue versus like people who are like, I'm going to get really into this. I do think it like kind of separates like it like I think that's the like that double-edged sort of becoming more mainstream, I guess, is that like when you become more mainstream a comic form, as a this, as a that, you get people who are like, oh, that's cool, and then kind of move on with their lives. And I think the people who stay, the people who create comics, the people who run comic book shops, are the people who are like, no, you don't understand, like
Yeah.
this is everything, like let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Like definitely I've been that person who somebody is like, oh, I really like this Marvel movie. And I'm like, oh, let me tell you about the backstory of like
Right.
Black Widow. I'm like, oh, no, 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 we're not on the same, we're you like this purely just as a form of entertainment. And like I've turned this into my mythology. So let me lecture you. Oh no, we're not on the same page here. Sorry about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure you know all kinds of crazy facts about Sailor Moon that someone
Oh,
who watched it in a different way, just
yeah.
that kind of just washed over them, you know?
Yeah, yeah. But like, I do think you still get, like especially I started doing conventions recently because I had, even though like I was working in animation, which goes into the convention circuit, I had never really like tabled by myself. And it was really fascinating because like you would get people who are definitely like sort of casual fans, people who are just checking it out. But even now, even with younger kids, you'd still get one or two who'd come up and be like, I love this. And because you mentioned this, I looked up this thing. And like you can see, it's like, oh, here's the little budding
Yeah, yeah.
next comic book fan who like
Yeah,
is
yeah.
going to make this their entire lives. And so that's really exciting that, no matter how mainstream things get, there's still that person who's going to be like, oh, they're gonna dedicate themselves to this in a way that like is going to make their parents a little worried, but
Yeah.
is like very relatable. It's like, ah, you've become part of the family here.
So you said that your parents weren't really into comics, and
Hmm.
I assume that extended to a certain extent, at least to animation as well. They're
Yeah,
probably fine with the Disney cartoons, but anything
yeah.
weirder
Well,
or harder.
it was this weird thing, and I think you probably know from also like the 90s of like there was this like weird like weird attitude where on one hand there was like it was very Tipper Gore, like your kids are going to like play a video game and then murder each other.
Yeah.
Like there was like a lot of like fear mongering about like the media that youth was consuming. Which to be fair is not that different from today when people are like TikTok's going to kill you. Like
Yeah.
it's fear mongering about whatever kids are looking at because you're not looking at it.
Mhm.
So there was that. So like, my parents were like, no, comics, video games, like, let's keep this PG. But then it was also the 90s, so helicopter parent hadn't happened yet. So like there
Right.
was also this attitude of like, well, if like we glance at it and it's animated, it's probably fine. So I got to sneak so much stuff past my parents because like they were just like look at it and they'd be like, I don't see any blood or nudity or gore. That seems fine. Or they'd like take a glance at like the VHS copy and they'd be like, okay, this just looks like some sort of weird movie. That's fine. Like it's animated. That's probably for kids. So like
Uh-huh.
one of the first animated movies I ever watched was The Savage Planet, which is this like insane experimental like French film that is like it's sci-fi about like humans who've been enslaved by aliens and they're fighting back against their masters. And it's gorgeous. It's this beautiful artwork, very much like it's similar to Moebius in style in a lot of ways. But I loved it, but like it was truly my parents glanced at it and they're like, yeah, it's next to Last Unicorn. That, Blockbuster wouldn't steer us wrong. It must be just fine.
Blockbuster. Yeah.
Believe in Blockbuster.
Sure, sure.
So yeah, so because of that, I think, and I think in some ways I was lucky because I do think because it's so mainstream now, like you've got parents who are like, you can't watch that. Like I know exactly what goes on in this. Whereas like there was still like an element of mystery to some of this stuff where they're like, yeah, okay, sure. Nobody's told me to be worried about this. So then, years later, I'm like, The Savage Planet is my favorite movie. And my mom's like, I just watched that. Like, how did you see that? I'm like, you rented it for me.
I love that. Did you know early that you wanted to go into being a writer generally, but animation and comics, or or what was sort of the genesis there?
So I think I did know pretty early that I liked writing. And I knew really early, like I would draw little comics for myself and my friends as a kid. So it is funny because there was a point where I thought I was going to be like, and this was like elementary school, middle school. It was like I got really into Jane Goodall, so I was like, oh, I'll become an animal behaviorist. Like I'll go out into the field. But what that meant was I would sit in my backyard and look at the squirrels for like 2 seconds, and then I'd write like elaborate, like Game of Thrones style stories about these squirrel dynasties and their families and do little drawings in the margins. So even when I was like, maybe I'll do science, like I was like, no, it's writing and it's drawing. That's the stuff that I care about. And when I went to college, like I initially went for theater to write plays because I knew that I liked writing, but I hadn't quite figured out like where I wanted to be. And then in college, like I took a TV writing class, and I was like, oh no, this is it. Oh no, TV, like animation, comics, this is all the stuff I love. So, when I finally moved out to Los Angeles, like I got an internship at Dark Horse Entertainment. I started writing for CBR back when Jonah Weiland operated it, and it was still sort of this big comics journalism hub.
Yeah.
And eventually made my way into animation, which was actually fun because the person who hired me in animation was a producer, Alan Burnett, who had produced, Batman the Animated Series, which was one of my favorite shows as a kid. So he had gotten a sample in front of him, and he liked it so much he started bringing me in to pitch things, and that was my way in. But yeah, so that was my long version of saying like always everybody else could tell that writing and comics and animation, that was something that I loved. Like I took a couple of detours to get there, but once I'm here, I was like, oh yeah, this is what I love.
Yeah. Well, but there was a lot of comics adjacent in there too. I mean,
There's a
writing
lot.
for CBR. I mean, that's certainly a
Yeah, yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Jonah published. I write a column on retailing, so Jonah actually
Mm,
published Tilting and Windmills. I want to say for almost 5 years there.
yeah.
Yeah. I miss those days back before the internet became
Yes.
kind of closed down and narrowed and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
corporate and yeah.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, there's always a reason like, yeah, yeah, when Jonah was running it, it was like, it was one of the best jobs I ever had. He was one of the best bosses I ever had. Like I was writing like the DC beat reporter for him, and like I loved doing that. But yeah, it's the internet. It was like when the internet felt like it was full of potential
Yeah.
and open doors. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, nowadays, I mean, you look at a comics news site and half of it's about movies, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's just like the same like list being generated and nobody's getting paid enough money. No, it definitely feels like there was an era there that is like gone. I'm not sure
yeah,
how you recapture that. Yeah.
yeah. No, I don't think you do, unfortunately, is the
Yeah.
problem. Yeah. Oh well,
Oh well.
oh well. Yeah. So what was the first comic that you wrote?
So the very first comic that I wrote was actually for an anthology for DC that was a sort of Green Lantern story featuring Mogo that got put together. I think at this point, like 5 years ago, in like a sort of uh, what you might call it, like anthology of like here's like what if stories or stories that would take place like 5 years, like 10 years in the DC future, or like little things that like were ideas for like bigger storylines that maybe could come to fruition. And then I also wrote at sort of the same time a short story for the Wonder Woman Black and Gold
Oh,
anthology.
cool.
Um,
Mhm.
and so, and I had sort of gotten into comics because, I had been working at Warner Brothers at that point on DC properties. So, sort of like there was some people knew who I was. So from there, at least at DC, a couple of the editors that really liked working with me. So then I got to write the Mary Marvel. Me and Doc Shaner got to work on the Mary Marvel New Champion of Shazam, which did fantastic.
Mhm.
I took over after Mark Waid as the writer for the Shazam ongoing comic,
Mhm.
and did some backups stories for Wonder Woman. Did some did the basically 2.0 version of Amazon's Attack that kind of spun out of King's book. But sort of in all of this, like I love working on the IPs, but like, I was like sort of noodling on ideas of my own, and wanting to do something that was kind of fully me. Cause when you work for like DC or you work for Marvel, you work for one of the big two, like, there's a, there are like sort of strictures, there's sort of parameters of like, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. There's a lot more scrambling behind the scenes of like, being like, oh wait, never mind, this character isn't available. All right, oh no, they're available right now. Work them in, work them in. Whereas something that is like sort of wholly yours, like, you have your editor working with you to make it the best it is, but you're like, here's just unfiltered me on the page. And so when I got the chance to pitch, I heard Skull Crusher to Boom. I was so excited because I was like, well, maybe they'll go for it. But even if not, like I've given it my shot. And luckily, it's like John Moisen over there, Daphne Plebin. They really liked it. Really liked my pitch of like, it's sports manga, but also queer, but also the apocalypse, but also a comedy, but also action. And they saw that through that word salad and was like, yeah, that sounds like a cool comic. And now we're here today.
Nice. I love that. So Skull Crusher was your first original.
First original, yeah.
Not that other comics weren't original, but
no, but yeah, but like a first one that was not a pre-existing character thought up by somebody in like the 1940s or 50s. Yeah.
That's pretty exciting stuff. What would you broadly say is the differences between writing for comics and writing for animation?
So there's less differences than there would be for writing, because I also work in live action a little bit. There's less differences than writing for like live action. For example, like comics and animation have a lot in common. So like honestly, like there's a lot of back and forth. Like one of the first shows I worked on was She-Ra that Nate Stevenson was running, and he had come from comic books. Like there's a lot of back and forth. But I would say the biggest difference is that in comics, you can sort of lean on and collaborate with your artist one-on-one way more. Like, like in animation, like you are collaborative, you are working together, but like you do need to sort of outline what's happening in every single moment of your script, both to take up space so enough time passes. So, it's not, oh no, we've boarded 30 minutes, there's too much stuff here. And also to give the artist time to be like, okay, they're working on a tight schedule, they need you to spell out like what's happening in the scene. Whereas comics, like especially working with Alessio, there's a lot more, we've been doing a lot more shorthand with each other, where I'm like, okay, I'm thinking of splash page and here's my influences, like Alessio, like what do you got, like what do you think? And he'll come back and he'll be like, here's this, and it's using like, Princess Tutu, and it's using like Sailor Moon, it's using this. I'm like, great, I love it. So like the scripts are a lot less like prescriptive, I think, and a lot more like, here's the dialogue, but like in the action, I'll be like, Alessio, this is what I'm thinking of. And then like, take it or leave it. And then he'll plus it, he'll like add panels or subtract, sometimes he'll be like, this would work better as like, I think this splash with like these things. And he's right. So it's a lot more like passing a baton back and forth with a friend, whereas animation is a lot more like you're important, but you are sort of a cog in this machine that eventually pops out an episode.
Yeah. Do you find that there are differences in the specific ways that you can or do tell a story?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is, like it's capturing moments in time on a page. So like and this is something that I'm still getting used to coming from, moving pictures, of being like, well, if I write like an action scene out, like he like this isn't a flip book where it gets animated. Like you kind of need to choose what things are important, like what moments are important. It's that the most basic form, pure form of storytelling. So I think when I started, my scripts were a lot more like animation, more like, here's every single detail. But now it's gotten a lot looser because I'm like, all right, here's the point of this, action sequence, or here's the point of this match. So here's a couple of suggestions of action. And then Alessio can take that and run with it, or he can like change things around. But it is a lot less, I think, as a writer, like what's important to communicate to your artist is like your intention and your vision, much more so than like, here's the exact things that happen. And so I think, again, because of that, I think comics is this lovely thing where the artist is bringing so much to it. And anytime I see somebody who's like a writer who's like, I did it all, like, no, you didn't. Like the artist is doing so much heavy lifting, and the artist is doing so much like storytelling along with you. Like it really is like the best comics work because these two people have like melded minds. And like truly for a while we were like baffling our editors because I would just be like, it's sort of like Studio Trigger. He'd be like, oh, obviously, fooly cooly. Like we would just throw terms at each other and we'd get what we'd want because we were just like, yep, we don't really need to like spell it out for anybody. We're just on the same page.
Yeah. What about how the audience works with and perceives, right? Because in animation or in television in general or
TV,
film,
yeah.
Things are linear. They must go past at 32 frames per second.
Yes.
There's no choice in that,
yes.
right? And you have to time things around that notion that the audience isn't going to stop and rewind and go back and watch something again. I mean, some people do, obviously,
but
most people don't look at moving pictures that way. Whereas in comics, it's very typical to read 3 pages and then go, you know what? I want to jump back and sort of reread that sequence again and think about it again. Or also how the audience draws conclusions from the work that may or may not actually be on the page. My example is always Lucy pulling away the football, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you actually read that cartoon, you show Lucy holding the football and you show her having pulled away the football, but you never see Lucy pull the football. Well, who pulled the football? The audience pulled the football. Which is, I think it's just such a fundamental difference in how you have to think about and break a story.
Yes, yeah. Well, because like it's, like especially if you like the way I read comics, like I linger, like it, like there is pacing to it for sure. Like there are comics that I still think have some of the funniest jokes I've ever seen, and I'm like, it's great pacing because I made it in my own head. But like, you linger, you can go back, you can like read into what's on that page much more so than sort of any other medium. So so like when it comes to that pacing, like the funny thing is, I'm about to say, kind of seems like it contradicts that, but not really. Which is like when I'm writing, I play the movie in my head. And like I'm basically freeze framing when I think like it's important. And then when I go and work on it with Alessio, we realize that the most important thing is sort of it's because it's still images, but it's sports. Like it would be easy for it to be confusing. It'd be easy for it to be like it's just kicking the ball back and forth. I don't really know what I'm looking at. But what he's done and what we've done together is like we're like, oh well, the important thing is like the emotions and the characters and what they're doing. It's not following the balls, it's following Trini, it's following Skull Crusher. So for us, basically, like I write it out like I'm freeze framing a movie, and then Alessio goes in and he's like, well, this is the important character, so we should see her face, or like this is the important moment, so we should like pull out for this. And it's much more sort of like hitting on those, like, again, the most basic pure forms of like, this is the most important point of this page, so we draw that, and everything else can kind of fall by the wayside. And it's that thing where you connect images in your head, of like that the football is here, that suddenly the football is gone, so your brain goes, oh well, obviously I didn't need to see the football get pulled away. Again, very apt for a comic where they play a game. Where we're like, we don't need to see them pass it back and forth and back and forth. Like what we need to see is like that moment of like, we've turned on the poison gas and everyone's dying, or like the moment where we've scored, finally we've won the match. So it's again, it's that purity that you don't find in other forms, And I think also like makes it more exciting to read when it's done well, when you have that chance to like linger on the page or like do that pacing for yourself. Because sometimes like I love animation, but sometimes like you'll get an animated sequence and it's a little boring. And that's because you get lost in the weeds. You're following the ball. You're not following the people. And in comics, you're never following the ball. You're always following the people. And
Yeah,
that's what
yeah,
makes it exciting. Yeah.
yeah, very much so. Did you when you were doing the scripting, did you like really think through the game and like build rules and that kind of thing, or were you a little more laissez-faire about it?
So at the very start, I did think through the game pretty thoroughly. I'm like, here's the scoring system. Here's how this works. I did try to keep it simple
Yeah.
because I'm like, it's a comic book. So like I said, like if you're just showing feet kicking a ball over and over, like somebody hitting a thing, like you're gonna lose people. So I try to keep it simple. But like I shared with Alessio, like here's the rules. Like you get murder points for killing people, you get points for being in the goalie square and being alive, and you get points for scoring a goal. Here's the point breakdown. Here's how usually you have to murder your way to victory. Here's how you could sort of subvert that and like actually like win by just playing the game and avoiding getting killed. And then from those very simple rules, we kind of go all over the place. Like I try to come up with like sort of like the gimmick or the idea behind like what obstacle they're going to face, because it's not
Mhm.
just scoring, it's the other team has weapons and they're trying to kill you. So it's like,
Yeah.
here's the gas mask team, the plague town team, and they've all got poison. And then Alessio will often like, he's internalized these rules so much at this point. It's like if I write something that's contradictory, he's like, Josie, this is not enough points to win the game. And I'm like, oh my God, you're right. We have to change this. So,
I kind of like that one actually. I think that's
yeah,
great.
yeah. He's like,
Oh,
yeah. He's like, they didn't murder enough people. I'm like, you're right. Oh my God. Okay. So I
yeah.
think the only thing that I'm a little laissez-faire about is like time. Because like, if this was if we had like, 50 comics out the door, then we could maybe have 10 of them be one match. But like I think all of the matches are a little condensed, sort of both because, that's comics now are a little bit more condensed. And especially with this first arc, we weren't sure if we were going to get any more. So we were like, all right, well, each match, we want this to be standout and fun and feel different, but also feel really fun and invigorating.
Yeah.
So let's go for it.
Yeah. It's got a lot of manga influence,
Yes.
obviously. But the thing that you just said now is kind of the difference between sports manga
Yes.
and this, right?
Yeah.
That this zips along in a way that sports manga, I mean, sports manga
Right.
does, right? But
But
sports
like,
manga
yeah.
will spend pages
Yes.
of just sort of the look on someone's eye as they're thinking about a
Think
thing, and then a leaf is slowly falling down to show
yeah,
that time is
yeah.
passing and things like
Exactly.
that.
Yeah. No, or like, like I've rewatched Slam Dunk and like it's like if you finish that series, you know how to play basketball because they're like, and here is dribbling. That's one episode. The next episode is taking a shot. And here's the 3-point rules. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So was there any like so I guess the difference between when you started scripting this
Yeah.
and then what actually came out, did the project change in that fashion, I guess?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think when I first sort of envisioned it, I thought it would move slower, where I'd be like, okay, well, maybe we can take like a lot of our time. But, as I was writing it, I was like, this is such a madcap world and it's so insane. Like the pacing felt wrong for it to be like, it takes like 20 issues for one match to finish. Like it was like, this is a world where everything changes in an instant. Like these people are like used to the apocalypse, but it's still the apocalypse. So sort of in writing it, like I like it was both realizing it's like, you know what, I want to see a bunch of matches. I want the audience to have fun. And then it was also like, and I want to like really focus. The thing that I want to sort of evolve slower is the character stuff,
Yeah.
where it's like we are becoming a team, we are becoming friends, we're getting ripped apart. What are we going to do next? Like, and especially I think for this first volume, the important thing to me became, oh, it's about Trini idolizing Skull Crusher. and Trini's dreams. It's like what happens when you accomplish your dreams and they're not what you expected.
Right.
And that became like the big spine of this. It's a little bit like, the rose-colored glasses she was wearing have kind of come off a little bit. And the question of this first volume became like, will Trini hold on to her innocence, basically? Will she hold on to her enthusiasm and her love of this, even though she's learning more and more what a crapsack world she's been born into?
Right.
And that became the important thing. So it became, I think it's a little bit more in that Western tradition of like, let's move faster. Like like there is decompressed storytelling, but this is, something where it's like, I want each match to like be a new lesson that Trini is learning or a new facet that Trini's learning about. And so that sped it up. And then also just sort of like writing it and working with Alessio, I'm like, I don't want to only see one team. I don't want to see only one match. I want to see the full breadth of this. And so that sort of changed it. So by the time we hit the end, it was like, this is the story about Trini's innocence. This is a story where we see a shit ton of matches and crazy characters. And instead of like one leaf falling down as a tear rolls down and he goes, the woman I love, as he makes his basket, like it becomes like, this is like an insane world that she has to navigate.
Yeah. Yeah. And so throwing more crazy stuff in it makes it better in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
The bigger you do it, the wilder that gets.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you I don't assume the answer is no, but did you know that Alessio was doing this when you?
So no, when we first started, so I Boom had reached out to me. I was in the middle of producing My Adventures with Superman, and they were like, "Hey, like we love your work over at DC. We love Superman. Like, do you have, off the off chance, do you have anything?" So this was something I'd been noodling on for like 2 years at that point. Like it kind of came out of the pandemic and me being like, the apocalypse. Let me think about that. And so I pitched this to them and they really liked it. And so like I got on first, and then we were trying to find an artist, and I was very adamant. It's like, like this is very much like a shonen style story. I would love to find somebody who like dabbles in that style. And of all the people, they had some artists they recommended, and one of them was Alessio, and they're like, oh, we hadn't really worked with him before that much. He did some covers for us, and I like looked through his portfolio. I was like, oh, this is great. Like I love this. So we like contacted him, see if he was game to maybe draw a couple of characters just to see if he'd fit. And he was like, yeah, sure. And then he sent us back this like design packet of like, and it's just what the comic looks like. It's just like there, like from page one, and was like, oh my God, he gets it. Like this is exactly like he's transplanted these images from my brain onto the page immediately. So he was somebody that Boom brought in, but it was truly kismet because like the moment he like read it, like he was just like, oh, I love this. I love the shonen style. I love this. I love how like dramatic it is at times. Here's my version of David, and he gets really scary and lifelike when he's like a bear, and then he's like cute when he's eating the honey. And I was like, perfect, this is it. And then it's also he really got not just the action but the humor of it all. Like there's so much stuff that like it's so much funnier because he's drawn it in like the chibi way, or he's like added a panel for us to take a moment to be like, oh no, coach is drinking again. You better stop that. Yeah.
Were you was it still in sort of pitch form at that point, or had you actually written a script?
So at that point, it was pitch form, but I was in the middle of the first script. So like we knew that they knew that they wanted to make it. So I was already going ahead and scripting. And so we sent Alessio the pitch, and that was what he drew the pictures. He drew his like sort of design packet off of, and I was like, oh my God, yes, absolutely. Co-creator, bring him on board. And then he got the sort of the first script. But then from there on out, like I sort of was writing to his style and his strengths. Like, and especially I think, you can see it in the comic. I think at first it's maybe a little tighter, like there's a lot of panels. And then as we go on, it like really like he really like it already looks gorgeous and he really blossoms. Like especially towards the end of that comic, there's some panels of the arena falling apart, or the Trini seeing like this town in danger, that are really really gorgeous and beautiful, and like it's better than I could even imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. Were there things that you changed about how you approach the story once Alessio was on board?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and again, I think this was like the whole evolution of working on this. It really was like focusing much more on the characters and the character arcs and those sort of emotions because I knew Alessio would have the action down pat. Like he would like, whatever I had written on page, he would come back and be like, "Hey, I have this idea for these like crazy, you know, uh, you know, monks that have exploding bombs that fight with them." I'm like, "Awesome, great." So and then also right away I could see that he really did such a good job with like he's so good at expressions and he's so good at drawing those moments where there's doubt on someone's face.
Yeah.
And so like that also like it became a lot more vulnerable, like Trini and Dan and all of the characters started becoming a lot more vulnerable in the writing, and going back and forth from like comedy to vulnerability became so much more of a highlight, I think, of the book, um, than just it's sports and it's violence. It
Mhm.
became like it's sports and it's violence and it's a meditation on innocence.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean that was one of the things that I very much liked about it was I don't know, sort of the tension between those points, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah. Um yeah, no, and Alessio's style is really I really wish that he'd been able to join us.
Yeah.
How did you guys communicate? Is it all via email or were you like getting on phone conferences or
So we talked a little bit over Zoom, but mainly we email each other back and forth, or we DM each other back and forth.
Mhm.
And like I said, it's very funny. It's like the international language of comic books really
Yeah.
transcends everything. So like my Italian is crap, and he is much better at English. But like so much of like us talking back and forth is like I'll like throw in images into my scripts, or like I'll make references to be like, hey, like I'm kind of thinking this is like shojo style, like with bubbles in the background. And he's like, oh, I was thinking this is like a Princess Tutu card captor type thing. So, or I'd be like, oh, I think it is a little Moebius. And he's like, great, it's a little bit like Blueberry. It's a little bit like this. So, like, it's so funny because it becomes a shorthand between two people, one in Italy and one in America. That I'm like, oh, it's this comic. He's like, awesome. It's also this comic. So it truly is our nerdery is like its own language that goes between the
Sure.
two of us.
Yeah. Do you know was he doing Italian comics in the Italian comics industry?
Yeah, so he was doing Italian comics. So this is like his kind of first big American comic that he's doing sort of interiors for, and he's also doing the covers because he'd done some covers before, but this is sort of his first big thing. And it honestly, like, I feel like I'm so lucky because like as soon as like he starts doing more stuff, like he's not going to be available anymore. He is so talented. It's so crazy. Like I really feel like I got in on like the first floor with him because it was just so apparent that he has such a dynamic style that makes you want to keep reading.
Yeah.
And something that like, and something that I've heard a lot from fans coming up and talking about the book being like, it's manga, but it's also like different than I've seen. It's a different style than I've seen before. It's not just, I think there's a lot of books out there that, a lot of us grew up reading manga and got really excited about it. But I think there's a lot of books that feel like it's a knockoff Japanese book rather than it's its own thing. And Alessio's made his artwork his own thing. It's manga influenced, but he still has such a specific style. You're like, this is him. And again, that is something both in animation and in comics is very rare. It's hard to find somebody who's like, I can tell what your influences are, but they don't overwhelm you. Like
Yeah.
you've made it your own.
Yeah. I think one of the big differences too between manga and America storytelling is that chapter length thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because most manga is in anthologies, as you know,
yep,
and they're typically 8 to 10 pages long for each segment,
yeah.
which means you have to approach the story differently. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, because with the American comic book length, it's 20 to 22 pages. Like it is not in an anthology usually. Like I got my start in anthologies, but that's not totally the format that American comics take. So it is much more honestly like writing an episode of TV. where you're like, you kind of need to have a fully formed story, even if there's like a cliffhanger, even if there's like overarching things that happen later on. It's you're telling sort of a serialized story, and here is the episode that you've like dropped the reader into.
Yeah.
Versus Japan, where it is like, it's and I just found out some of this too is, Japan has this history of having, a lots of magazine formats where they have like 10 to 30 stories, and you pick up the new magazine each month. And part of that is because they have it's a much more walkable infrastructure, so they still have news news carts and like little stands in like the subway or on the bus or on the train where you buy that month's manga. And obviously in America it's very different. You're buying it in one big chunk, or you're like trade waiting. You like read a comic and you go, I want to get the whole thing together. So yeah, so I would say the difference really is I'm not assuming I have a captive audience sitting on the bullet train to Tokyo.
Right.
I'm assuming I've got somebody who's dropped in for an episode, and I want to hook them, so they're like, you know what? I want to come back next week. I want to come back next month and buy this next issue and read this new story that expands what's going on, but also each one is an encapsulation of like what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, that commuter culture thing is a really interesting observation because, in America, most people are probably not taking public transportation, etc.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Like they're getting into a car
Yep.
where they're the only person in the car and they have
Yep.
to focus on the driving portion of it,
Yeah. There's not like a I can read the comic to you
Yeah.
section of like, here's the words and then this is what it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's much more, I think it's like much more becomes like a leisure activity rather than like something that you put in between your day. So it's like if you're picking up a comics because you really want to pick up that comic, it looks
Yeah.
cool, it grabs you. So
Yeah.
it's a challenge, but it's also what I think makes American comics like interesting and very different than anywhere else.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I would even go to the point that I think it's one of the reasons that, for the most part, the anthology comic in the United States has never been a particularly
Yeah.
popular form, right?
Yeah.
And the way that I always phrase it is that it seems to me that the American audience judges an anthology by whatever they like the least in the book.
Yes, I
Right?
can see that.
Whereas like Japanese style, you're as long as there's some kinds of things in there that
Yeah.
you're interested in, you're going to
Yeah.
keep following it, which is
Yeah.
such a different way of thinking about how that work gets approached.
Yeah. Well, because I think it's like, like I said, America's more used to like, here's like this episode, here's this one issue. It's the same thing where like people were like, oh man, Black Mirror is over. I had one episode I didn't like. I'm like, yeah, but you had like 5 other episodes you really loved.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
just
but I
a
really
very different
hated that
approach.
one episode.
Yeah,
Man,
yeah.
did I think that episode was terrible.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So yeah, so it's so funny because like America still does anthology stuff, but yeah, it's like everybody's favorite stuff is like, oh, let's get into these characters. I don't want to learn about a new plot somewhere else. Like I want to
Right.
watch these people. I want to read these characters. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, the book ends and clearly is set up for much more.
Yes.
Was that your intention going into it, or was it that you got like halfway through and you went, oh gosh, this is really working, we can keep building on this?
So I definitely was trying to like force it to keep going because my original pitch to Boom was like, I have arcs for things that happen after these first 5. Like I
Okay.
have stories that keep going. Like I definitely had a way I could end it. If like, for example, they're like, no, we're not really interested in doing more. That would have been satisfying. But like the draft I sent in to my editors definitely had that cliffhanger. And because I was like, I think this is really fun and I can change it. And like by the time I sent it in, like I was lucky that by the time I sent it in by like I think like the 3rd issue, so they're like, no, we're gonna make more. Like no, it's we're gonna keep going. Like don't worry, this is an ongoing now. So like we got lucky that like it became so popular so fast. It hit its audience so fast, and Boom was like so happy with how it was doing. and like it was like Boombox was like so thrilled with it that they're like, oh no, you're gonna get more. So like I always wanted it to keep going. Like I do have an endpoint in my head, but you know, I was ready to be like, all right, I guess, you know, we'll only do these 5. And they're like, no, 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 no. This is great. People are really reacting well to this. Keep at it. So yeah, so we're you know, the first couple of issues of this next arc have come out. We did have to take a little bit of a break just because of both the holidays, and then I was on maternity leave for a little bit. But sort of the remainder of arc 2 is going to be hitting back in March. And it's you know, this first arc is very much sort of you know, scrappy, get the gang together, like let's come together and fight the good fight and win. And the second arc keeps on going on that sort of like theme of like, okay, your dreams have come true, now what? Here
Right.
you are, like, is this what you imagined it to be?
Mhm.
You know, and again, I think it will continue on. I think the main thread that will always continue on in this series, no matter what, is like, is that idea of like, you know, innocence, and that idea of like, what can you take out of a crap sack world? What can you get out of this apocalypse? Like, will you let it turn you bitter? Will you continue on? How does it change you? How do you deal with the fact that this is a world that doesn't allow dreams to thrive when you have so many big dreams? And that is going to continue on through this next arc, and however many issues they'll let me do, because I'd love to do as many as humanly possible.
Yeah. How many arcs have you already figured out in your head?
So I've figured out like 3 to 4 arcs in my head.
Mhm.
I've got ideas for like more. I've got ideas to extend it out. So we'll see how it goes. Because also, you know, with comics, you know, especially a lot of publishers, just like, you know, TV episode lengths and TV series sort of have gotten shorter, and they're like, it's 10 episode series. Like a lot of, especially a lot of original comics have gotten a little bit shorter, and they're like, even if it's ongoing, like we have a definitive endpoint. So we'll see what happens, but I've definitely got stories for the next couple of years for sure.
Yeah. It's an interesting difference between the serialized periodical comic form and the graphic novel form,
Yeah.
because you know, graphic novels run at least 200 pages long, at least.
Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
what, 110, something like that? Well, there's no page
Yes.
number, so I can't actually look. Um, but
But
that, I
yes.
mean, I think that changes the nature of how you're telling the story too.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I was aware like early on that they wanted to collect it into one graphic novel. So, you know, there are things that you're doing where it's like, you know, there is that arc over all 5 issues. There is that arc that's going to go through the next 5 issues and the next 5 after that if we get that. But it's yeah, it's a very different beast to write something for the monthly market versus all in one go. Like I think I would I would love to be able to write something all in one go one day, but I also think that for this story, it kind of works. It kind of works that you get like dropped into Trini's world one issue at a time. Again, it feels much more like a shonen manga in that aspect, but it's also, I think it works to be like here. It feels like there's so much more going on. Like
Yeah.
it feels like there's this incredibly rich world that you're just seeing a little window of, and that makes you interested and want to keep reading.
Mhm.
And so that's sort of how I approached it. Was like I know that there's ultimately, if you read them all together, it tells one story. But if you're just dipping in for an issue or two, it also tells a complete story in that one issue that makes you hopefully want to go. I want to keep going. I want to know what happens. What murderous moppets are they facing next issue? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. Is there other aspects of the world building part of it that you want to spend time on, or are
Mhm.
you really going to keep the focus on the sporting part of it?
So I think by nature of actually the sporting part, you're gonna get more of the world building. Like
Mhm.
this first graphic novel, like truly sets up the world. You see the great American wasteland,
Mhm.
what has become America after the bad week, which is just every apocalypse you can probably think of. Like I have a list, and just every issue they mention a new different bad thing that happened that specific week that led the world to be like this. So in this first issue, I think you really get like basically the common people's view of the world.
Mhm,
This is Trini. Trini is a wastelander. She's sort of a wasteland orphan. This
mhm,
is her world. And then sort of in the next arc, we go to the bubble cities. We go to the
mhm.
world of the rich and the prosperous, and we see the difference between the wasteland and those who live in these domed cities and technically can sort of control the world. And with that, I get to expand the world even more. And
Yeah,
I've got plans from beyond that. Like there's so many different things I want to play with this world. Like there's some stuff coming up that'll also tie into like how the wasteland became the way it is, like
mhm,
some backstory to how the tyrants became in power and how Queen Mob took over.
yeah,
So, but it's again like the thing that I want to keep it on is it's all through this aegis of we're playing the game. Here's this tournament, or if we've learned this, it's because something's gone crazy with the match. Like
right.
the sports is there as a spine, but now it's letting us, just like the first volume, let us explore the characters. The second sort of like arc volume that will eventually come out explores the world and how we got here way more. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, that is pretty exciting. And Alessio's on board to keep doing this for a while?
Alessio's on board 100%. Alessio's full speed ahead. He's already sent me the next bunch of artwork for this next arc. So I love working with him. So as long as we can, we're gonna try to keep going. Yeah.
That's fantastic. No, I mean that's so it's so exciting too to have sort of I mean, not the first thing you've ever written, but
Yeah.
your first project, like not only be a success, but to it be a joyous meshing
Yeah.
of creative talent, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's ultimately what's worked so far with what's worked about this comic is I think you can tell that we're having a hell of a lot of fun making it,
Mhm.
and that turns into the page of like it's a hell of a lot of fun to read. Like again, I've had a lot of people come up and like I've worked on big properties like Superman, Wonder Woman, this that, but like the thing that sells out at conventions is Skull Crusher. The thing
Mhm.
that I get people coming up to me and being like so excited about is Skull Crusher because they're like this is a joy to read. And
Yep.
even in its darkest, weirdest moments, I still want to know what happens next.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think that joy behind the page, and also I think that like what drew us to it, this sort of like madcap, crazy tone changing world, is also really appealing to people because I think again, it's not like a lot of other books for adults, especially on the market. Like I think there's a lot of adult, especially indie stuff that is like very serious, or you've got adult stuff that is it's fun, but it's very soap opera in a very specific American way. And I think this feels like a punch to the face in like the best way possible.
Mhm, mhm.
A punch that you're like, I don't know what I just read, but I'm gonna look through it again because this is wild. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it gives you a freedom that you almost certainly don't have when you're working on other people's IP.
Yes.
You can't change Superman at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Like there's Superman still got to be Superman. You can add other things to Superman's world that Superman has to react to, but you can't change Superman himself.
Yeah, yeah. And it's, this is going off on a tangent, but I gotta think that's also why sometimes like people really love the Elseworld stuff a lot, or they really like, like these absolute comics that DC's putting out,
Mhm.
because it's like you can't change Superman, but like God, people would love a new story. People
Yeah,
would love a new take or a new thing. And
yeah,
so again, I think that's what we've done with Skull Crusher is like, yeah, it's not this IP thing. You don't know what's coming next. And it's different. It's different and new.
yeah. Yeah, no, I hear you, particularly on those absolutes.
Yeah.
I, uh, I, I am just in love with that absolute Wonder Woman.
Oh my God, it's so great. It's so
Right, like it's not Wonder Woman kind of at all, but it's
yeah,
absolutely Wonder Woman, and
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, again, 90s kid. I grew up with like, Vertigo and Elseworlds, and like I love those stories. And like it is exciting to me because like that's stuff that I always wish that, the big comics would do more of. It's just like here's a different it doesn't matter. It's a completely different take. Like Ultimates is doing that for Marvel. It's
yeah,
like really fun to be like, throw all the rules out the window
Mhm.
and
Mm.
let's have this tattooed Wonder Woman riding on like, like skeleton Pegasus is with
Yeah.
her giant anime sword. Like,
Yeah.
let's go. That's fun.
Yeah. And to me, I don't know. I mean, this is where we're probably going to go too far down the hole. But the thing I really kind of found the most amazing about it was how she managed to make Steve Trevor actually a character that made sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I've read Wonder Woman for 40 years or something like that, and I
Yeah.
never really understood Steve Trevor at all.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
why
Yeah.
is he here? What does
Oh,
she
yeah.
see in this guy? It makes no sense.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I thought Perez did a really good job of
Yes.
trying to make that work, but
Yeah.
even there, kind of shuffled him off,
Oh
the
yeah, because
stage
I
really
think
fast.
I think especially with like Wonder Woman, because I'm a big Wonder Woman fan. It's like I think it's very easy to find the things that are stand out to people as most exciting is like the mythology, the gods, the powers, the like Amazon islands, like
Yeah,
the Themyscira, down to the point where it's like it's this giant expanded world that I got to write in for Amazon's Attack of like there's three different tribes and this. And then yeah, it's she's done such a good job of grounding it back in character in a
yeah,
way that like I don't know if I've seen before really for Steve or for some of the supporting characters
yeah,
that she's really grounded it in like okay, who is this person? Like the
yeah,
mythology is all out there. Who is this person? And like
yeah,
that is exciting
yeah. No, it really is.
and fantastic. Yeah.
No, it really, really is. The particular imprint that Boom is publishing under is Boombox on this. I had thought that Boombox, at least originally, was meant to be more of a YA kind of an imprint.
Hmm.
Um, but you were talking earlier about how this is a very adult comic.
Yeah.
Was there any, not conflict is probably the
Hmm.
wrong word, but was there
Uh-huh.
any friction there? Uh,
So we it's so funny because YA bumps up against adults so much.
sure.
Like there is, there's it and there's so many different like forms it takes. Like Boombox is YA, and like ultimately, like, this is I think marketed as YA, but like I've had so many adults come in and like it because like, we're dealing, I think, thematically with bigger things. So I think that's sort of like I think the frisson there was I was like, I have big like ideas about like themes and a big ideas about like what this world is that feel darker and more adult. But when I started writing it, like we're like, but it's still this basically fun world where like, if you're a teenager, you can still get into it. And I also kind of think that there is, a lot of these demographics are much more for sort of the marketing than it is for the readership. Because
Right.
like again, like when I'm selling Skull Crusher at conventions or signing it, like it's truly like I see the traditional YA audience come in. I see people in their like 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s come in and be like, I love this. I kind of think that it's one of those things that like it's interesting enough that it grabs a bunch of people. And then I'll say also, again, Boombox is YA, but like I think YA is pretty expansive. Like we've seen that in just like the regular publishing world, where the majority of the YA market is being bought by adults. It's teenagers and adults, and so I think it's kind of more this sort of like almost like bridge, the stepping stone for if you're on the younger end of the spectrum. This is getting marketing towards like it is darker than I think some of the other things they're going to read. There's murder in it, like people are actively trying to kill each other on this field of play, but it's still fun enough that like you get sucked in. And then if you're older, you're interested because not just of the violence but because of the world, the character, these things. So at first I thought there'd be a little bit more friction, and every now and then we hit a line where we're like, okay, this is too much for like a teen rating, like let's pull this back a little.
Well, that's what I
um
wanted to ask. Like, what kinds of
yeah.
things did you downplay, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically, and again, it's so funny because I've worked in YA for so long. It truly is just gore. Like,
Mm.
if like, dark themes, a-okay. Like people betraying each other, stabbing each other in the back, that's fine. Murder, mayhem, that's okay. But like, let's like tone down the blood, like not blood. Like, let's tone down this so it doesn't look like it's like, let's not see the sword open a person up from guts to sternum, that sort of thing. which actually I think really works well again for this comic because there's a comedy. It's funny.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like, a lot of
The murder is playful.
the murder is playful. It
Mhm.
wouldn't be playful if like you were seeing like full on like, Taunton style, you've been like opened up. So
Yeah,
I think the YA rating really worked in a way to make it better and to make it more fun to read. And again, we're still reaching the same audience of like, I've got people from like 16 to 60 coming in and being like, I really liked reading this. So
yeah.
yeah, so it's YA. You can absolutely give it to your teenagers and you can absolutely read it yourself.
Yeah. And were these decisions that you and Alessia were making, or were these decisions that editorial helped you shape?
So editorial definitely helped shape because like also like when I pitched it, like that was, they have their imprints, so they were trying to figure out where to put it, and Boombox is kind of where it landed, which again, YA, but like me and Alessio didn't want to like hold back on anything. So truly it was like editorial being like, okay, I think this is like too much. Can we like change this panel? But
Mhm,
like once we got into the groove, like those conversations kind of like fell apart because like or went away
mhm.
because like then we're like we got it, we got what the tone of this book is.
Yeah,
And like honestly, as somebody like when I was a teenager, like I would watch Justice League Unlimited, and then I'd watch like
sure,
it's YA is this like age group that's so fascinating because it's like they're watching adult stuff, they're
sure.
watching, and adults are reading the YA stuff. Like it
Yeah,
truly is much more of much more seamless than you would think outside of things like that's too much blood on the panel or like
sure.
don't watch them piss their pants, that don't
Right,
put take that out. Yeah.
right. Yeah. No overt sex, things like
Yeah, yeah,
that as
yeah.
well.
The most graphic form of graphic, no.
Right. Yeah. It's it's interesting though because I think that in prose, YA gets away with a whole lot more
Oh
that
yeah.
we would never fly in comics
Yeah.
because once you see a thing, once you
Yes.
draw it,
Yeah.
then it's there, you
Yeah.
know? I in fact I remember when DC launched their YA line, which
Hmm.
was Ink, I want to say.
Yeah. Hmm.
5, 6, 7 years ago, whatever it was. The first couple of books, like I was flipping through them, like that's a little strong for a for
For
a
a
YA
YA
book,
book.
you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Because I don't think that they had quite made that
Yes.
cognitive leap that you
Yes.
can't show. There was a Catwoman
Hmm.
comic, I think, and
Mm,
there was
hmm.
like a 4-page conversation where they were talking about some character's penis size, and I'm
You're like,
like, wow, that is not. I do not feel comfortable selling that to a 12-year-old girl.
yeah. It's
You
so
know,
it's so funny because you're totally right that it's like prose gets away with stuff because you're not seeing the image. I mean,
right?
it's I think all the time about, like again, coming from TV, like when the Gossip Girl TV show came out, they were based on YA middle school like adjacent novels, and people were like, whoa, this is way too sexual. And I'm like, all of this stuff is in the book.
Yeah,
Like it's so, but yeah, once you see it, it hits in a different level. So
yeah,
yeah, so I mean, again, like, I worked on Shira, I worked on Jurassic World Camp Cretaceous, like My Adventures with Superman, like from animation, and now in this, like it really is this like thing of like, all right, like younger kids, teenagers, are tweens, they are looking for something that challenges them. They are looking for something that's fun, but is
sure.
different. They're looking for something, maybe it is darker, maybe it is more romantic. But like, yeah, trying to find that line of like, okay, well, now this is just too much. Like if they look at this, like they're not going to enjoy this, or their parent is not going to feel comfortable with them reading it. Um, is definitely like a fine line to sort of trod, and again, especially because that some of this audience like is consuming adult stuff already.
Sure.
So I think the best YA stuff is the stuff that like finds a way to like connect with a teenager or an adult, and you like it for the story and the characters, you like it for the artwork. Like I feel like if you're in a comic just because every page there's a new way somebody's ripped out a spine, then maybe you're not going to stick with it. Like you can play
Right.
Mortal Kombat. Like
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's interesting too because I think that, and you kind of alluded to it with your own life before, that
mhm,
in comics there tends to be a point around 15, 16, 17
yeah.
that you stop reading comics. whether you're a
Yeah.
boy or a girl, right? Like
Yeah.
you just stop reading comics because it's all too childish or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I think some of it, I mean, I know for me, it was like a combination of like, there is a gap. And I think it's that thing that like, there's an uncomfortableness between like adults and like tweens and teens of like, I'm uncomfortable giving you this book, even though I think you would like it.
Right.
Like, or like, I'm uncomfortable like having you read this, even though I kind of think that you've already read it or like, so it's hard that people start being like, well, you're not a kid anymore. So you'll find this too childish, but then we think this is too adult for you.
Right.
And then I also think, a lot of that is, there's for a long time, there's sort of this missing piece of like fun. Like I think a lot of, especially like, again, like I grew up in the 90s, so I got to see this change, but like people's attitudes for comics changed. But there's still this sort of idea with all reading that like once you hit teenager, you have to read like there's specific books you have to read. You have to learn. Like if you're giving graphic novels, they're like, you have to read Mouse now. And Mouse is a fantastic comic, but like it becomes homework. Like you
Yeah.
have to read Persepolis. Like
Yeah.
there's this idea that like as a teenager, you have to read Catcher in the Rye. You have to read Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
These are for your education and your edification. It's not for fun anymore. So again, that's with Skull Crusher, with those sort of things, I was like, well, I read for fun. Like what got me through was reading Sailor Moon, and I read that for fun. I read Ranma half for fun. Like these aren't comics that like, these are comics that like, have themes and stories and ideas and I learn things from, but they weren't like the prescribed, like here's the canon, here's the classic literature that we would like to force upon you.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a good portion of it. I think we expect teenagers and young 20 somethings to stop reading for fun. Even as we like bemoan, oh, they're not reading anymore. We expect, well, what we want them to read is very serious things that'll like change their worldview.
Yeah.
And like, just let them like, Diary of a Wimpy Kid is fun. And now we expect them to read Beloved and like continue to want like, Beloved again, great book, but like, oh boy, like this is homework now. Like we expect you to read, the classics. Like you're supposed to read the Decameron and love this. So yeah, I think I really do think a lot of this is making comics fun for every age group and like accepting like some comics really are like this incredible growing experience. Like, all the comics I mentioned, like Mouse, Persepolis, all of these things are beautiful works of art and absolutely lovely, but you lose focus and you lose that love if that's the only thing you ever get to read.
Sure.
If the only thing that's ever given to you is here's all of J.D. Salinger and you have to read it and you have to write an essay on it.
Yeah.
So I think like it's really important, especially for parents, for adults, to be like, is this something that like I would have a blast reading? Yeah, let them read it. Like let's make reading fun again.
Yeah. It's interesting in comics that, and we've backed away from it a great deal, but there was definitely a period of time where writers and editors in comics started taking it a little too seriously, I think. And they stopped letting some of the superhero comics be fun again. There was definitely a point in time where someone would come in with like a 12-year-old and they'd be like, I'm looking for a Spider-Man comic for my kid. And I would go, I can't give you any of these that are on the shelf because somebody's arm is getting ripped off. I mean, not like, physically on the page, but it's definitely there in the content,
Yes.
And that, that's problematic sometimes. I mean, you worked on Shazam, and so you understand the difference between having that action and having that fun part of it, as opposed to it being too serious. There was a point in time where Captain Marvel was what got really dark. He was like a homeless kid, and it was very unhappy, and there was no joy in it. And particularly a property like Shazam should all be about joy.
There should be comedy. There should be fun. Yeah, exactly. There should be joy. Superheroes, like fundamentally at the end of the day, it's a fun experiment of like, okay, what would I do with flight? What do I do with powers? Like what are these, like Shazam's main villain is Mr. Mind, a like psychic worm from Venus. Like, but yeah, no, it's, and I would see that too. Cause it's like, I think, it was very easy, and TV does this too sometimes. It's like, it's prestige now. It's this prestige thing. Prestige means that like you know, we've learned a lesson, and like we've like talked about a very serious issue. And again, all of that stuff is great in like moderation, but if it's the only thing you're reading, you like you kind of cloud over, you lose interest. Like, you know, absolutely go out and seek that stuff. Like I love a lot of that stuff. I also think that the sort of very serious tone also clouds some of the stuff that like is really great out there, that like is dealing with really big issues but like isn't packaged the same way. Like, you know, like I know Pornsack over at Boom right now, like all the stuff he's doing is great, but like The Good Asian is such a fucking good book, and it is, I think, one of those books that you're like, yeah, this is about something, this is talking very seriously about
Yep.
like, you know, his experience, the experience of Asian Americans. Like
Yep.
it's about these big themes. It is prestige, but it is packaged in such a fun, different way, because it's, you know, the pulp, it's the more, it's the detectiveness
Yep.
that you, it's fun to read. It's a joy to read. And like I think people assume, you know, like if something is important, it has to be serious in a way that like makes it a little bit of a chore. And
Yeah.
it's not. It can be The Good Asian. It can be some of these fantastic books that are out there that like are, I would say, are like very important texts and like wonderful texts to read if you want to talk about deeper themes in our society.
Yeah.
But like they aren't packaged like, here's your homework now. It's packaged like, here's this, you know, this pulp, and now that you're drawn in, we're going to talk about these serious issues, but like in a way that is so appealing and so fascinating that it makes you want to keep going.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. Let me just ask you one last question about IPs and
Yeah.
things, because I'm interested in your take on this. You wrote the Mary Marvel, the
Yep. New
new
champion of
champion
Shazam.
of
Yeah.
Shazam, and it it looked to me like the intention of that series was to pivot, right?
Mhm.
So that she was Shazam, and that was it,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And but then it seeed like it changed the next year or something. Like, can you
Mhm.
talk me through that at all? Without, I mean, obviously,
Yeah,
without
yeah,
talking about backstage stuff that no one
yeah.
should be talking
No,
about.
yeah. I mean, you know, that was, I think the big thing that was going on at that point was, I mean, the same thing with a lot of things in like TV was just like, you know, we were going through the merger. And like there was a bunch of big changes behind the scenes of like things like, you know, who's in charge, what people are going through. So, you know, we pitched this as like, you know, this was the idea is like, you know, reinvent Mary as kind of her own standout like character.
Mhm.
Then sort of by the end of it, it was different. They were like, okay, we've got different plans for her now. Like we're going to do the Shazam book. This is going to be this different thing. So then it became like, it was always intended to be a mini series.
Mhm.
But definitely like the plans for the character changed a little bit. But what was great for me was, even though the plans for the character changed, the editors who I was working with were like, well, but we like Mary on her own. So even though she's not going to be like, you know, the star of the Shazam book, like that's still Billy, like we still want her to have a part in the DC universe. So that's when I started writing all of sort of like the Wonder Woman portion of things. Like that's how we
Mhm.
fit her in, where suddenly she has her own starring role in these Wonder Woman backups. She's fighting with Nubia. She's doing this. And so for like a year and a half, I got to sort of write her continuing adventures.
Right.
So it definitely, I think now, like, you know, there's definitely been still some more changes. Like it really depends on like, you know, the big names. What are they doing? Like the sales, how are they doing? Like who does editorial want to sort of focus on?
Sure.
I do think that what has been successful with like new champion Shazam is, a, so many more people are so like, I've met so many people excited about Mary Marvel, and so many people who are like, great, I can like, I'm pointing to this as like, here's one of her like seminal stories. Like this is why I like her. Like
Mhm.
she's so fun, she's so plucky, she's so like, you know, she has so much going on. And then, you know, I think even though it didn't turn into here's her own series or anything like that, she's now, I think, much more ingrained in the DC universe to begin with. Like, you know,
Sure.
when the Justice League came back, with like, I think Wade was writing with Mora, like it wasn't just Billy, it was her
Yeah.
too. Like we've got their co-equals. Like she's showing up on her own in different things.
Yeah.
But you know, I think some of that is it's just the nature of the beast. You know, like while I was writing it, like, you know, we had like Christopher Priest had his Black Adam comic, with like sort of a whole new cast of characters that have kind of gone away.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like the nature of things where you start working on something And because it's monthly sales, it can really change on a dime. And they're like, okay, we've changed the strategy now, or we've changed the idea now, or okay, we've got a different thing for her now.
Yeah.
So like what I focus on is like I got to tell a fucking fantastic story with like Doc Shaner, who is like one of my favorite people in the whole world. Like truly, like if you had a bucket list of like who would you like to make a Shazam comic with, he'd be like number one. And
Yeah.
so, and like, the comic is still there, the
Yeah.
graphic novel is doing fantastic. Like I got to make my mark on Mary. And
Mhm.
so that still is like, despite, changes of like, we gotta focus on this character or change this thing. Like that book still exists and it's still there for people to find, which is great.
Yeah. Because we were talking earlier about how Superman can't change, Wonder Woman can't change,
Yeah.
etc. But characters like Shazam
Yeah.
seem like they can change every generation.
Yeah, yeah,
There's
they
not a
get
lot of loyalty to
reinvented.
the idea
Yeah.
necessarily.
I mean, it's so funny because I think some of it is like with some of the bigger characters that have been popular, like people find some aspect of them that they like. But like even with like Superman, like he does change. Like, like my adventures, what's happening now with Superman is that he's a lot more of the big blue Boy Scout.
Right.
But like for a while we had, the Zack Snyder, like I am a god upon men who's like sort of distant and like trying to like connect with my humanity but can't. Like,
Uh-huh.
we have, Invincible exists because for a while we had like what if evil Superman, and like everybody like got really excited about that idea. So I think even with these big characters, like every basically like 5 to 10 years you get kind of a new take on them, even if it keeps Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen and all these things.
Right.
So like I think it just goes faster with characters like Shazam
Yeah.
because yeah, while they were super popular in like the golden age, like they've had a little bit more troubles finding an audience. So you get that reinvention a lot faster. Whereas like
Sure.
the big heroes that you see, it's a little slower because you have like a generation of readers being like, great, Perez, this is my Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
And then they're like, like new people aren't glomming on. Okay, Cliff Chang and Brian Azzarello, this is my Wonder Woman. Like,
Right.
and it just keeps going in cycles.
Yeah. You also get the movies and things like that impacting the characters in very
Oh
strange ways.
yeah, yeah,
The pivot to and I didn't dislike the idea, but the pivot from it being Billy to being okay, there's 7 Shazam
yeah,
members,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
they're all color coded too.
Mhm.
Like all right, all right.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's the Power Rangers, yeah. I mean,
exactly.
it's but like I said, it's like it's so funny because it's like every new generation, yeah, it reinvents it faster than it
Yeah,
reinvents it for this next. Because I've definitely met people who are like, "God, what are your plans for Darla?" Like they love Darla. They're like
yeah,
Darla
yeah,
super fans. Like when does she
yeah,
get powers back?
yeah,
So
yeah,
it really is. It's just like yeah, it's just every so often the big ones get reinvented, and then the ones on the side get reinvented faster until something sticks, and
yeah.
then it's that slower cycle. It's almost like you're talking about a living organism rather than a story in some ways.
Sure. But
It's
it strikes
evolving.
me as it has to be much harder as a creative person
Mhm.
trying to navigate wanting to tell the best story and then also
Oh, yeah.
the corporate need to
Yeah, yeah,
do
yeah.
a thing, right?
Yeah.
That's why I always think creator-run books are always the better way
Yeah,
to
yes,
go,
yes.
right? Because you're not in anybody else's hands. You can do the
Yeah.
kind of story, you can build the kind of world
Yeah.
that you want to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like with, Skull Crusher, it's like you mentioned, like one of my favorite things is how fast we change tones in this. It's like it's silly, it's funny, and then it's very serious. And then someone's dead. And then that death is actually a punchline. Like
Yep.
it's like the way I prefer to write and it's what I prefer to sort of read on my
Yeah.
own.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think especially with the corporate stuff, I mean, that's just the challenge of like commercial art. I
Sure.
think period is that like technically you've got a client, like
Sure.
you've got, and it might not necessarily be the audience.
Right.
So it is like it's definitely more fulfilling when you're doing your own creator own thing because like it feels more freeing to write whatever you want to put on page,
Mhm.
like to push the boundaries of however you want to do this.
Mhm. Mhm.
Versus something where yeah you would get you get notes of like oh no this is now happening, they can't have this set of powers, or this is now happening, they cannot be part of this like next arc.
Right.
You know, that's, you know, that is much more, yeah. I think a lot of ways the IP is much more editor driven,
Hmm.
or versus I think originals where the editors are helping you craft this and it's much
Yeah.
more creative driven.
And
Yeah.
they're trying to help you make it a better story.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
like, yeah, there's a big difference between here's some notes that are like, you know, let's make this bigger, or let's pull back on this, and notes that are like, oh, we can't have, you know, Wonder Woman do this thing because that contradicts this.
Right.
And you know,
Yeah.
I love both forms, but yeah, I I think that, you know, I also think that audiences react better to like original stuff because again, they want something new, they want something
Sure.
they haven't seen before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and Skull Crusher very much is. Well, I'm thrilled that you've got 3 or 4 at least already planned, and I'm sure by the
Yes.
time you get to 4, you'll have 5 more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I really hope that you end up getting as much out of this as you want.
Yes,
If
yes.
it can be 10, 12 books,
Oh my
I
god,
really hope
amazing.
that you're able to get there, and I think
Yes,
you can because I think it's very strong.
thank you.
Is there anything else that you're working on in the creator-owned space that
Mhm.
you can talk about or that you want
Um,
to talk
so right now, Create on Space for me, this is sort of the only book that I've got going on. Like I said, it's an ongoing. So for your people who are picking up the trade, there's probably going to be another trade. I think probably at the end of next year or so, or with this next arc that's going on. If you want to catch up with it on a monthly basis, it's going to pick up again in March with the next issue. Like I said, it's a new facet of the world, so it's going to be really fun. So that's it for me in the comic original space. I
about?
know for Alessio, he's working on a book called Kyle Travel that is in France, but the digital version of the sort of English translation is going to be coming out in digital and paperback really soon.
Oh, good.
So stay tuned for that. And like you can follow him. His Instagram is Alessio_Zono. And he's been posting artwork from it and looks, and because he's such a fantastic artist, looks fantastic.
Mhm.
And then yeah,
You're
that's
such
that's
a good, generous partner there. That is, oh, I mean, not many people will like, okay, and here's where you find them on
Here's where you
Instagram.
find him. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Here's where you plug him. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, like I said, I love working with Alessio. I want to keep working with him for as long as possible.
Mhm.
So yeah, so for in the creator owned space, this is my baby right now. This is my focus. This is the thing I came up with in 2020 and pitched, and I've been working on ever since.
Yeah.
Again, like in the IP space, like working on Shazam. I'm my Adventure Superman. I've got some other projects in the works with DC, but yeah, creator owned. If you want a full unfiltered Josie Campbell, uh, jokes and blood and murder and queer characters falling in love and everything,
Mhm.
pick up this first trade.
Yeah. And this is going to sound like a really self-evident question, I suppose, but how important was the queerness to you for this book?
Mhm. Oh, very important. I mean, I'm, like Trini, I'm bisexual myself, and like it's something that I, so much of Skull Crusher is a little bit based on myself. Like when I was, in high school, was the giant women's soccer World Cup match that happened, where the famous image is Brandy Chastain ripping her shirt off and like crying to the heavens in joy. And I had that picture on my wall at home. And like my parents, who I was not out to at the time, were like, huh, I guess Josie really likes soccer for some reason. So like for me, it was like the Skull Crusher. I'm like, it's that. It's just like Trini's kind of me a little bit of that like fangirl who like has its idol, and Skull Crusher's the sort of the Brandy Chastain of it all. That like is both, she wants to be her and be with her. And then there's more of a love triangle with sort of like Dan in there as well. But it was very important to me that it's this zany queer character who basically is this like bisexual disaster running through the world, because both that's like kind of who I was at that age, but also something that I even with books that have queer characters, there's not very many bisexual characters. Like the like pickings for queer characters are pretty slim, and also often prescribed in pretty narrow like views of like this is what the mainstream will accept. We'll accept a gay man, but like talk polyamory, we're out of the door. So
Mhm.
like you talk bisexual, like we don't get it. So it was really important to me, and it was one of the first things that, when I pitched this to Boom, I'm like, if it can't be gay, then I'm not going to make it. Like that's just, that's it. Like this is a young girl, like, coming of age, learning like losing and like regaining her innocence, and love is part of that. And luckily they were like all on board. They're like, yeah, absolutely. Like I wouldn't have made this book if they're like, it has to be straight, Skull Crusher has to be a man. I wouldn't have made the book.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. No, I'm glad to hear all of those things.
Yeah.
Um, well, I think that's most of my questions. Hey, how about this one? What didn't I ask you about Skull Crusher that I should have?
Um, Man, I don't know. We had a pretty good talk.
Yeah.
I guess like because I'm guessing if people are tuning in, they know the book a little bit, or they like know your stuff. I guess you could have asked, what is the plot of Skull Crusher?
Oh, well, but
But like, yeah, that's just it's a teenage girl who
yeah,
loves her sports idol and wants to be exactly like her.
yeah.
And it just happens to be her sports idol is Skull Crusher, who plays a literal blood sport called screaming paintball, and she lives in the apocalyptic American wasteland,
Yep.
trying to make her dreams come true.
Yep.
But yeah, I think other than that, I like it's like I said, it's really like it's been a joy to work on. I really love, like, I fall more in love with the characters. Like again, arc 2, if you pick up this trade and you want to keep going, arc 2, you learn a lot more about Skull Crusher. Like we're getting a lot more of her as a character as opposed to this sort of like goal that Trini had.
Yeah.
And But there's still going to be, there's still sort of like aspects of the romance. There's still aspects of the shoujo manga, like in the shonen manga. Like there's still a lot of fun to be had. Like the team is a little bit scattered, but they're coming back together. You're going to learn a lot more about the twins and Dan. And overall, it's just an expansion. If you like this first volume, get ready, because the world is about to expand and blow up in the second half.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, well, so the last question then, much like the first, I ask everybody the same last question, and it is essentially thus. This is a series of interviews that we've been doing. We do 2 interviews a month, one for the adults and one for the kids.
Yeah.
So I'm talking, we're pretty close to 250 interviews, somewhere like that, around this time. A lot of people watch this who want to make comics themselves, and what I constantly hear is, I would like to do this, but I'm not sure of myself. I don't know how to start. I don't know if I'm good enough. Oh, woe is me. Can I possibly express myself? That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So what might be the piece of advice that you would give to a young Josie Campbell, or Josie Campbell-esque, to encourage them to use their voice and to get out there and to try and make something that they love. This could be something practical and physical. This could be something emotional. This could be something spiritual. But what would be your piece of advice?
I mean, my biggest piece of advice is honestly something that got handed down to me when I was working at Dark Horse, which was just, well, you have to start writing, because you're never going to reach that good point if you don't start. Like you're never going to make your good novel. You're never going to make your good screenplay if you don't start writing. And like nobody's going to hire somebody who wants to be a writer. They're going to hire somebody who writes, who is a writer. And that is the most important thing. And especially like I get like the self-doubt, and I get like the feeling of like, oh, I don't know if this is right. And like the bare bones explanation is like, everybody's not that great when we start. Like everybody has a learning process. Everybody has to figure out a way to like find their voice. Like the things I was writing in like high school are not as good as what I write now, but I still had to start writing. So I also think that people get very like caught up in getting published versus making something. Like you should be writing, like, and again, this is for writers, but like you should be writing. Like if you stick with it, if you're talented, if you're able to work through it, you probably will be able to get published somewhere, or you can self-publish. But like there's a difference between I want to be the next Tom King and I want to write a graphic novel. And maybe that graphic novel sits on your shelf for a while. There's a lot of people who wrote that graphic novel and then years down the line got it published. But like your goal for creating should be creation. Like, I want to create this, I want to make this. And if you make it and you love it and you work on it, eventually the rest will come. And then I say my second practical piece of advice is find others who also want to write and draw. It doesn't have to be people who are already broken in. Like, I got into my industries being recommended by friends who were assistants to people who I had worked on, scripts with or had done like plays with. Like I had a lot of people that I work with now. We all did sketch comedy together, and we weren't doing it because nobody was hiring us to do this. We were doing it on our own. We were putting up shows on our own. We were like writing screenplays on our own. And eventually that did turn into a job, but like we were doing it because we wanted to make it. Especially in today's climate, like there's so many people who get their start and then like go onto webtoons or go onto this or that or host their own thing. Like if you want to write today, start today. Take your laptop, go to a cafe, be one of those people working in a cafe, write a little bit every day, and then when you're done with that, start the next thing.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Those answers are fantastic and absolutely true as well. Well, I really want to thank you for your generous time this morning. I've had a blast. Hopefully you've had fun too.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm gonna put you off to the side for a minute here, and I'm gonna do a little bit of wrap up. Hi there, you. How you doing? You doing okay? It's a weird time right now, isn't it? There's a lot of stuff going on. The beginning of January it's been really rough in a lot of ways. And so maybe you're sitting there at home and you're like, I need some fun in my life right now. So I'm going to go recommend this I Heart Skull Crusher. It is so much fun. It is, well, you've heard us talking about it. It is fun and funny, and it's got sports and it zips along, but it's also got a lot of murder and a lot of comedy, and it's kind of everything you want in a comic book, frankly, I think. So get this. If you were to buy it from us, which you certainly can, there's a button, there's a thing. You would also get a special signed book plate that only comes from us. But you don't have to get it from us. Get it from your local store. Get it from the library if you want to. But thoroughly recommend I Heart Skull Crusher. Do it. It'll make you happy. I also want to do a couple thank yous. I want to thank Jordan, who's my producer, does a bunch of stuff that none of you see, but we couldn't do shows without him. I want to thank Ben for running the show today. Thank you, Ben. I want to thank my awesome staff, Zoe, Kat, and Katie, along with Max and Chrissy, who are the best comic shop staff that you could possibly have, and lets me sit here and have conversations with creators. Which is just kind of the coolest thing in the world, to be able to sit and talk about creativity with people. I want to thank all the members of the club. If you're not a member, please consider joining. It's what allows us to do this, and it keeps the store operating. And I think comic shops are really important in this time. And I think our jobs are a little hard too. So anything you can do to help us or your local stores, please do so. I want to, I also want to thank, well, hold on, wait. I also want to do, I always do this in the wrong order. It's so weird. The next couple of shows, just so you know, next month's show for kids is we're doing Mr. Muffin's Defenders of the Stars, about a dog who goes into outer space and saves the universe. Really funny stuff. And then the adult pick is The Murder Next Door, which is about it's set over here in Oakland as well, about a guy who was a kid, and how there was a murder next door, literally the title of the book, and how that affected his life for years to come. Wonderful piece of biography. So look for both of those shows, look for both of those books, but definitely read this one. The last thank I have to make is to creators and people like Josie right there, because if it weren't for you making great comics and doing great work, I would be sitting in a store full of blank pages, which would suck. So thank you so much. for all of the work that you do. And again, we wish you so much success for this going forward. I hope we get 10 volumes out of it or more.
Yes.
Let's shoot for the moon. Let's go
Let's
for
shoot
50.
for all of them. Yeah.
Let's shoot for all of them.
let's-
That's right.
We want a One Piece style. This is the rest of my life. Yeah, exactly.
It sounds good to me. Again, thank you so much for your time, Josie. I've had a blast. I hope you've had a blast as well.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we will see everybody next time then. Bye. Thank you for watching this episode of the Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed what you were watching, please subscribe and hit that bell up in the top corner. If you enjoyed the books that we're talking about and the creators that we're talking to, every month we pick a brand new book. The staff votes on it. It's a program that helps keep our store alive, and we'd love to have you as a member. You'll get a new book every month. Just follow that URL at the bottom of the screen.